Hello, everyone. Welcome to our October research webinar. Thanks for joining us. If you'd like to put in the chat where you're tuning in from, we are always very curious to know where our audience is. And for those of you who are new, welcome. We are the Canadian Coalition for Homeopathy. And we're very pleased tonight to have a conversation with Dr. Richard Moskowitz. And you can see here the cover of Dr. Moskowitz's recent book, Conscientious Objector, Why I Became a Homeopath. We will be hearing about this book tonight. And I just had a quick look earlier this evening, and the book is now widely available through various homeopathic booksellers, as well as most places, it seems, where you can buy books. And just a quick word about the coalition. So you can see our website here, homeopathycoalition.ca, where you can sign up for a newsletter and find our social media pages. So the Canadian Coalition for Homeopathy launched in April of 2022. And the mission of the coalition is to bring together patient associations, homeopathic practitioners, researchers, and industry stakeholders who wish to promote homeopathy in Canada and preserve the freedom of choice in medicine. The primary objectives of the coalition are to help educate the public on the many benefits of homeopathy, to debunk false information about homeopathy, to dive into the research supporting the efficacy of homeopathy, and to defend and promote the access of homeopathic medicines in Canada. And we have been presenting these webinars on a monthly basis for all of this year and some of last year, and all of the recordings are available on YouTube. And there are two more that are scheduled for this year. So if you'd like to attend, then again, please join the newsletter or follow on social media, and you'll be kept up to date about when those are open for registration. And here's the YouTube page, and tonight's webinar will also go up onto the YouTube page in a couple of days. Just a quick thank you to Remedies, which is a app for home prescribers. And if you'd like a tool to help with your home prescribing, then download the app. It's free. Check it out. And with that, I will hand it over to Liz, who will introduce our guest for this evening.
Thanks, Victor. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest, Dr. Richard Moskowitz. He trained in conventional medicine at New York University School of Medicine and went on to receive professional training in homeopathy and self-training in herbal medicine. He has a long and distinguished career in family practice and has served on the board of the National Center for Homeopathy and was an active member of the American Institute of Homeopathy. Dr. Moskowitz has written numerous books, including Homeopathic Medicine for Pregnancy and Childbirth, and his most recent book, the one Victor just mentioned, Conscientious Objector, Why I Became a Homeopath. Dr. Moskowitz, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
All right.
So what would you like to talk about? Oh, you're going to interview me. Okay.
Well, we have some questions, and we'll have some time after the discussion for some questions from the audience as well. So if you do have any questions, anyone who's listening, then please put them in the Q&A section rather than the chat, just to help keep things organized. But perhaps we can start by talking about the title of your recent book, Conscientious Objector. Perhaps you can elaborate on that and give us some background about what that means in your case.
Okay. Well, I was never comfortable with the idea of practicing medicine the way I was taught. At first it was ethical primarily, that it was the ethics that bothered me. I even when I was in college, I got a traineeship in biochemistry at a lab in Maine that did a lot of cancer research. And my duties were simply taking a group of mice, perhaps 6 a week, and injecting them with various chemicals and then checking their serum proteins by electrophoresis, which was a brand new technique at that time. I mean, we're talking that was like 60 years ago, and and I just didn't I felt like I was being like the place was an Auschwitz for mice, and I was Dr. Mengele in training, and I just couldn't stand it, and so I would just hang out in the library and try to find some vaguely humanistic title that I could read. And I realized perfectly well that medicine was devoted to exactly the kind of research that I was very reluctant to do. But nevertheless, I persisted, but I still, as my senior year progressed, I still couldn't quite make up my mind to apply, and I took the law school exam and I did quite well on it, and I was accepted into graduate school for government, and which was my one of my main interests at that time, and still is, in fact. And and so by springtime, I still hadn't applied, and I really, my father had to pull a string to get me into medical school at all. He called up his friend who had graduated from NYU, and he called the dean and he said, this guy's okay, and blah, blah, blah. And the next thing I knew, I'm going to NYU. And, just the idea of not on some being on some career path was intolerable for me. Even though my advisor advised me to do exactly that. So anyway, I went to med school and I was determined to give it my best shot. And the first 2 years were fine, just a lot of book learning, and I understood the ritualistic aspect of the anatomical dissection, and that was okay. But I knew that from that experience in the laboratory, that I didn't want to do chemical or laboratory research. I knew that I wanted to do clinical medicine. So it was the third year that got me started and got me finished in a way, because I saw that there were things about it besides the dissection that I didn't like some of the experiments that were being done they just felt wrong to me. Like there was a famous pediatrician who discovered what many people had suspected, that hepatitis A was transmitted through the feces, and the way he found out was by giving it to children who were disadvantaged children in Willowbrook State School for mentally challenged young kids who, their parents were unaware of it. They never consented to it. And so he did indeed find out by feeding the fecal material to these children. And, some people made a fuss about it and tried to get him to stop it, but he pointed out very correctly that the disease was rampant at the school in any case, and so he was allowed to continue his work. And I witnessed people dying in the most horrible way, with tubes coming in and out of every possible orifice, and all sorts of drugs and IVs being administered, and the parents and the relatives and the loved ones were not there, and it just felt wrong to me in many ways. And so when I graduated, I really I didn't want to go into medicine. I just was turned off. And I actually got a fellowship in philosophy, and I went to graduate school for 3 years. And that was a good move because I was trying to make sense of what I had just lived through. Um, but then my fellowship ran out because um, I was drafted, and I had to I had to report to the draft board, and and it turned out I lucked out. I got a 1Y, which was physically, mentally, or morally unfit for service, except in the time of a national emergency, which I felt had me described pretty well. Um, and because I had filled out the application, but for officer candidate school for as a medical officer, but when they asked if I had any relatives behind the Iron Curtain, which I did, or if I belonged to any of these subversive organizations on the Attorney General's list, which I didn't, but I thought this is none of your business. So I just left those questions blank. And the next thing I knew, I was a 1Y. And um, so anyway, I felt that I had to finally do my internship and get a job and earn an honest living. So I applied to this hospital in Denver, which was near where my fellowship had been in Boulder, and and I did my internship there, and I discovered that I actually enjoyed practicing medicine, seeing patients and really paying attention to them as individuals and seeing if there was any way that I could help. But at the same time, there were procedures that I was being trained in that I didn't like, that I didn't want to do. And so when I went into practice finally, after my internship, which was 1 year, and it was in general medicine, um, I found that I I would see people in my living room in the most unpretentious way possible, just to make them feel at ease and not wear white coats and stuff like that, and, and use as few instruments as possible. And I would make the diagnosis, but then I would put it on the shelf and not pay too much attention to it, and just try to let that patient guide me into some path that would work for them. And it was good. It was clean, but I had really nothing affirmative to offer them. If they had a chronic illness and it was getting worse, I hadn't I wasn't willing to put them on drugs for the rest of their lives, and so I didn't have anything affirmative to offer them much. And then something happened which really changed my life, which was that some woman came to me, and she heard that I was a little weird, and um, she was going to have a baby, and she asked me if I would come to her house and help her with the birth, which I thought was totally crazy. I'd never heard of such a thing. But as I talked to her, I realized that she was giving me a present, that she was showing me a way that I could practice medicine that made sense to me, because I was helping her do what her body was already trying to do. And so it was almost a religious experience for me. And I was very fortunate because the birth was beautiful, and and the baby came out at dawn, and he and his mom were sort of bathed in a halo of light, and all the people there were we were just mesmerized. We were just staring at her the way people have always done since the beginning of time. Um, but of course, it never occurred to me for a second that anybody else would have such a crazy idea. So it was just like a little treasure that I kept in my drawer. as a vision, a glimpse of what was possible. And then I decided to go back to New York to just this was this was in the middle of the Vietnam War, I have to say. And that was another thing that bothered me as I began to see that the medicine I was trained in, I was being trained as a warrior, as a to fight against disease, against every disease or abnormality wherever it showed itself, and to develop the most powerful weapons that we could find to fight it. And suddenly the clash with that vision that that woman's birth had given me was so intense that I didn't last very long in New York. I well, I won't bother you with the story, but there was we 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 did home visits in this clinic, and our clientele was in the way down in South Brooklyn. The people were poor, mostly black, and this guy was too sick. He was in his 90s, and he couldn't get into the clinic. So I went down there, and as soon as I got it, I walked into his room, and he saw me. I had a little white mustache, and he thought I was General Pershing, his commanding officer in the First World War. And he got up and saluted me, and and then he doubled over in pain, and as I was easing him back into bed, I felt his liver, and it was studded with cancer. It was obvious that he was terminally ill and he was going to die soon. So I took his wife aside and I told her, you know, that we could get a housekeeper for her to help. And she was over 80 herself, and she wanted him in the hospital. So, so I went to the residents and talked to them, and I said, "Look, you know what he has, and I know what he has. Let's just give him plenty of morphine and let him have a decent exit." And they looked at me like I was from the Stone Age, because of course they wanted to do a liver biopsy and they wanted to give him chemotherapy, even knowing perfectly well that it wasn't really going to help him, but they just needed to know how to do it. So that was my wake-up call that practicing medicine in the Big Apple wasn't going to work for me. So I went back to Colorado, and I got myself a cabin in the mountains, and I started delivering babies. People got the word that I was open to doing home births, and before I knew it, I was as busy as I could possibly be. And for some reason, I must have been in a state of grace in that at that time, because I never lost a baby. I never had to take a woman to the hospital. And I was there for, 2 years, and probably, I don't know, something like 100 births. Um, so it was wonderful. But then I moved back to Boulder and started working there. And and it was, it was wonderful. But I really I decided I wanted to study herbs and things like that, and do a more natural kind of thing. Now, I heard about this Japanese acupuncturist in Santa Fe, so I decided to go down there and study with him, and that was quite wonderful. But I it was Japanese. I felt like I was going to have to learn Japanese and drop my culture in a certain way. So, so as much as I liked the idea, I knew that it wasn't gonna be my thing. And, but it was energy medicine. And that was what it set me up perfectly for homeopathy. And I'd heard about homeopathy just because there was an old lady in Boulder who had a health food store, and she would motion people into her back room, and she would douse with a pendulum for homeopathic remedies, and she would give them. And a lot of the stuff that she did seemed like hocus pocus to me, but she loved having me around, and I would follow her around, and she did some wonderful things. So anyway, I found the book on homeopathy, and I couldn't make any sense out of it at all. I but but I heard of an old homeopath back in Vermont, and I I had a patient who was really allergic to bee stings, and so I thought maybe I should give them apis, and that was about the extent of my knowledge at the time. So I called this guy up and I asked him if that would be an appropriate prescription. He said, "Well, sonny boy, I think you ought to come to our summer school." So, so I did. And as soon as I walked into that class, I knew that this was exactly what I needed. What it was perfect for me because it was teaching me to do what I was already doing, making the diagnosis and then putting it on the shelf. And it was giving me a way to approach this person as an individual, as an energy system, in effect. So I was hooked from then on. And And really, what I need to talk about today is not just why I became a homeopath, but why I remained a homeopath for 46 years. And even though I certainly was not an expert or anything like that, I mean, I studied with people who were, but I was helping people. And our allopathic colleagues seem to forget that what we all know, which is that when you're a physician or a healing person, your practice depends on whether you're helping people or not. Otherwise, they're not going to come to you. So it was it worked well in my hands, and I immediately started doing things that I couldn't have done before. Of course, my practice was still built around home births a lot. And that was how I developed a family practice, because then I would see the kids and I would see the father and I would see the cousins and the uncles too. So it was a wonderful thing. And so I opened up a practice in Santa Fe and I joined the hospital staff, and some of the young doctors, the GPs, were really interested in what I was doing. Even though, I mean, home birth was pretty far out, and the OBs in town weren't happy about me by any means because I was competition for them for one thing, and they used to tell wild stories about me. In the midst of their hysterectomies, I found out the nurses would tell me these wild tales. But 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 it was okay. I mean, I got along with them okay, and when I needed their help, I was glad for it, which I did sometimes. But I some woman that I had just met called me up because she had a breast infection and she had terrible pain in her breast when she nursed especially, and she begged me to come to her house, so I did, and uh, and I examined her, and bryonia seemed like the right medicine for her, just rummaging around as I did in those days, and there weren't. I mean, we didn't really have. I don't know. Did I have a repertory then? I think I did. I might have just used Berkey. I guess I had Kent's repertory right then. Um, anyway, I chose bryonia. I gave her a 200, and I gave her a dose, and I gave her a little envelope with some more in there, and told her to take more if she needed it. and I was getting to leave, and she begged me to stay overnight because she'd never used remedies before, and so I stayed there that night, and I got up in the morning, and she was totally fine from that one dose. She never had to repeat it, and I thought that was pretty amazing. And I started having experiences like that. I mean, my very first patient actually was myself. I was driving up to a town, Espanola. It's about 20 miles north of Santa Fe, and some drunk guy pulled out into my lane, and he hit me head on at 50 miles an hour, and I thought it was curtains, and it, really, if I'd been driving the car I have today, it would have been. But I had this big old 48 Plymouth, and the front end got totally destroyed, but I just got knocked unconscious and broke a couple of ribs, and I woke up and I saw this guy. I wanted to strangle him, and I get out of the car, and then I realized I'm all busted up, and so so we go to the hospital, and the 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 driver puts me. I was okay in the car, not too bad, but he puts me on a gurney in the emergency room, and if I just move to one side or the other just a little bit, and I get this terrible pain in my chest. So I call up my nurse and ask her to bring a kit of my kit of remedies, and I put I put a little bit of arnica on my tongue, and I was able to take my shirt off, and I was, I that was the end of it. I was pretty good, and so I was having experiences like that just fortified me in what I was doing, and so so anyway, that's how I became a homeopath, and I loved it. I just, it was a lot of study. That was the other thing that I really liked about it, is I like to study. I like books. I like knowledge. I like just steeping myself into something. And homeopathy just fit the bill perfectly because I knew that with those hundreds and hundreds of remedies, I mean, there was no way that I could possibly be on top of all that. I just kept going, and as do we all. So,
Excellent.
so I'll leave it at that for a while. That was a long-winded answer.
No, it's great. And yeah, I mean, so I mean, even to go back to the title, conscientious objector, and what based on what you've been saying too, there is a certain kind of mm, well, the residences of war and of violence
Yeah.
that are there in the conventional medical system. And brought to mind a quote by Martin Miles in his wonderful book, Homeopathy and Human Evolution, where he talks about how modern medicine was born from war, actually, modern allopathic medicine. And the fact is that everything in existence carries with it the spirit that prevails at the time of its creation, just as
Mhm.
the seed is carried forth to the plant and the subsequent fruit. And so everything in our conventional allopathic medical system, including the process of birth itself, is treated as either a serious disease or a potential emergency. And what allows for or necessitates a kind of dependence on the system is precisely the fear that is part and parcel of the very foundation of the emergence of this allopathic system. And homeopathy, perhaps you can talk about the difference in terms of the moralistic foundation of homeopathy, how it treats the human being, but then also its broader understanding of actually the nature of health and disease.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah, it's a lot of homeopaths are turned off by organized medicine, or, I object to the term conventional medicine because that seems like it's slighting it. It's sort of dismissing it as of no importance. But um, I so I call it orthodox medicine, but um, it misses the elephant in the room, which is the mighty system of medicine that we've developed, which is the model for medicine throughout the world. It's dominant, and and um, there's a lot of good in it too. And um, so I thought I'd read you a little passage from Claude Bernard, who was the great physiologist, French physiologist of the 19th century, because I think he prophetically captures the essence of Orthodox medicine. He says, neither physiologists nor physicians must imagine it their task to seek the cause of life or the essence of disease. That would be entirely wasting one's time in pursuing a phantom. The words life and death, health and disease have no objective reality. When a physiologist invokes the vital force, he does not see it. He merely pronounces a word. Only the vital phenomenon exists with its material conditions. That is the one thing that he can study and know. And then he concludes, what did I do with that other passage? Oh yeah, there it is. What we call the immediate cause of a phenomenon is nothing but the physical and material condition in which it exists or appears. The object of the experimental method and the limit of every scientific research is therefore the same for living as for inanimate bodies. It consists in finding the relations which connect the phenomenon with its immediate cause, or to put it differently, in defining the conditions necessary to the appearance of the phenomenon. When the experimenter learns the necessary conditions of a phenomenon, he is in one sense its master. He can predict its course and appearance. He can promote or prevent it at will. We shall therefore define physiology as the science whose object is to study the phenomena of living beings and to determine the material conditions in which they appear. So that's causal medicine. And what we've come up with are a series of abstractions that we call diseases, in which, and abnormalities, this is the other component of that. And and our aim there is no longer to heal individuals, but rather to master human physiology, to be able to control it, to develop a technology powerful enough to do that, to force the blood pressure to rise, to fall rather, to normalize the thyroid condition. Um, and it's it's quite beautiful in a way, because surgery, for example, could not possibly succeed without that mastery. Our patients would die on the operating table if we didn't master that. And that has become the prototype of what medicine is all about, to control. But that that's a military structure, and it it is often separate from what the patient actually feels or experiences. So there's the language of medicine, the technical language of abnormalities and diseases, and then there's the ordinary language of the patient. And the beauty of homeopathy is that it speaks the language of the patient, that it approaches the individual as a unified and unique energy system, and cause is not in it. It's so you have to do both as a physician. You have to know both languages and you have to speak them fluently. But the beauty of homeopathy is that it lives in the language of the patient, because it's what you have is not one thing causing another, but rather a synchronicity, a a gestalt of symptomatology, of signs and symptoms that express roughly but pretty well the condition of that patient as it is at any given moment. And so, even more, that enables us to follow the patient from visit to visit, because the patient is this is the beauty of clinical medicine, is that either the patient is better or they're not. There's not a lot of ambiguity about that. So we're not simply following their lab results, we're following their experience. So they tell you they're better. And if their lab results aren't better, well, that's interesting too, and you may have to pay attention to that. But still, you have that basis. So, and similarly, our goal, our ultimate goal, is precisely that which is dismissed in Orthodox medicine, namely a healing that happens spontaneously without any medicine at all. That's what we aim at. But that's the placebo effect. That's something that modern medicine deliberately distinguishes itself from. So there's some beautiful ironies in that you know surgery, after all, um, is the prototype of medicines, of causal medicine, as I said. And if you uh, if you repair an organ that's broken, or you remove a part of the body that's already dead, that's superb, that's magnificent. But ultimately, it succeeds because it converts the disease into a wound, and wounds heal. So at bottom, surgery relies on true healing, but it doesn't say that. It doesn't credit that. Um, so it's ironic in that sense. Um, so so homeopathy has this great beauty, and a lot of the beauty is vested in the idea of the single remedy, that that the remedies have the same unity, the same wholeness that an individual does. Um, and one of the things that is so exciting about practicing homeopathy is that when you've seen a number of patients and they're cured by the same remedy, you unconsciously develop a picture of that remedy that you can't put into words, and you don't even remember the rubrics that led you to it in those cases, but you you, you can say, when a patient walks in, a lot of times you can say, I bet this is a sulfur. And I've done that. I've played with that. I'll write sulfur in the margin, and then I'll go take the case as if I hadn't seen that and see if it turns out. And sometimes it doesn't, but a lot of times it does. It's a little seductive and dangerous, because if you rely on that too much and you don't do your work, you can make a lot of mistakes. It's a little dangerous, but it's a beauty of the method that it leads to that you can, that's a lot of what your experience consists of over the years. So, and while I'm on that subject, I think I should say that um, the cured cases are a wonderful body of information, even more in a way than the proving symptoms. Um, Roger Morrison has just come out with a new book, which is called Clinically Verified Materia Medica. And what he has done is he's taken all of the cured cases that he can find and write and study those as a unit rather than simply have a repertory of uh, of proving symptoms, because proving symptoms are wonderful too, but they're on healthy people, and so it's a little hard to see really convincingly what what the important symptoms of that remedy are. Of course, there sometimes it's really strong, a strong symptom, and sometimes it's weak, and so you can do very well with it because you don't have enough cured cases to go on. But ultimately, the cured cases are the most reliable of all, I think. Um, so, so I don't know. Oh, and another thing about homeopathy that's very beautiful for me is that it's based on anecdotal evidence. That I use that term because in 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 Orthodox medicine, anecdotal evidence is it's you know it doesn't count until you have a, a randomized controlled trial that proves that such and such causes such and such to happen. Um, but anecdotal evidence is really what medical practice is all about. That's what we do. We see a patient, they tell us their history, and then we go with that. And and what I've found is that the anecdotal evidence is what tells us what to measure in our randomized controlled trials. And that became apparent to me in a big way when I started getting into vaccines, because I would never in a million years have come up with the idea that I wound up with as a result of seeing patients. That was what told me what we need to measure, and it's 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 astounding. Um, I'll get into that a little later, um, but I love anecdotal evidence. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and of course there is when you look at all of the traditional medical systems from around the world, they all relied to a large degree on empirical knowledge,
Absolutely.
knowledge derived from direct lived sensory experience and observation,
Yes.
rather than a kind of dissociated framework that then is superimposed, where
Yeah.
the lived experience is disregarded in the worst cases,
Yeah.
and simply a protocol is superimposed or pushed on top of a situation, or on top of an individual or even collective, without really understanding the individual details that are there in front of you. and
Yeah.
and as you say, with homeopathy, it is really about the the image of the disease, yeah, how it shows in an individual person. And there's a great line from Kant where he says, "We have in the image of the disease an exact representation of the image of the remedy." And so that's how knowledge of the remedies is developed, through this pattern recognition, understanding the uniqueness of the expression of the individual and all of their fullness, and
Right.
and then the pattern that's inherent in a substance that's taken somewhere from the natural world. And
Right.
that also it's a beautiful thing, because it shows that there's a correspondence, actually, that states of human health and disease are mirrored and reflected in patterns and processes that exist already in nature.
Yes. Yes.
So maybe you can say a little bit more about the rational versus empirical, and perhaps maybe even because you've been in the medical world for so long, how perhaps you can reflect on how has this schism become even more pronounced in your experience between the valuing of empirical knowledge and observation versus the dissociated rational kind of superimposition.
Well, you see what say a drug company is interested in is they're looking for a technology which is going to be able to control a certain aspect of our physiology so that it's going to force the blood pressure to go down, or it's going to force uh, the thyroid to normalize, or and that's going to be reliable so that pretty much every patient that you do that is going to show that result. So you have to develop a considerable force to do that. Um, and so for that, it makes sense that you would need a randomized controlled trial. That's a good a good step. Um, but um, with homeopathy, you're you're not you're not trying to do that. You don't want to do that because first of all, when you apply that force, if that force is sufficient, it's going to do not only that, but some other things that you didn't think about. And so because you're commercially invested in this, it's very easy for you to just put that off to the side and call it side effects, and maybe you don't look very carefully. But where it really made sense to me was when I started looking into vaccines because in the 80s I was I mean I already didn't like the idea of vaccinating everybody. That didn't feel right to me just on a gut level. I didn't have any evidence or anything. I just was leery of it. And but then in the 80s I started seeing a lot of sort of vaccine injured children and and it made me curious. I took a sabbatical and uh, studied immunology quite a bit during that year because I was seeing it in my practice, and and of course I wanted to. My approach, being allopathically trained, was I wanted to see what a specific vaccine would do to would how it would bring about a certain specific effect, a certain disease perhaps. But it was very difficult to see that because, first of all, several of the vaccines were triple to begin with, like the DPT, the MMR. And secondly, we gave them so often, and particularly to children, that it was very difficult to see. I saw a few cases where the kids would develop symptoms that were typical of the disease that it was supposedly preventing, and so I could make that connection. But that was unusual. But then I began to notice that the kids were reacting non-specifically to the vaccine, in that they were they were more likely to get whatever acute illnesses like flu or something that was going around the community. And the main thing that I saw, although it wasn't the only thing that I saw, but the main thing that was really predictable was it would make worse whatever chronic diseases were already present. And like chronic ear infections, for example, which were omnipresent, they were ubiquitous at that time. And So, so I started seeing cases from the MMR vaccine, and I started wondering if maybe it was a specific effect of the MMR vaccine. But no, it turned out that the DPT was doing that also, and then it turned out that other vaccines were doing it also, and then it further turned out that it could be any disease, any chronic disease whatsoever. It didn't matter. It ran the whole gamut. So, so that's telling me that there's something about the vaccination process. It's not this vaccine and it's not this disease. It's how the vaccination process is working. And then I began to see, and the other thing that made it difficult to see was that chronic diseases tend to wax and wane idiomatically anyway, in terms of the individual. So, um, and of course, that made it also easier to dismiss the effect as an idiosyncrasy of this particular child, because it was the pattern of the child rather than of this disease or that disease. So, but if you just, gave the kid antibiotics, um, it would lessen the symptoms, but the child was still ill. And so I found that if you got them better with homeopathy or with acupuncture or herbs or some natural method like that, and they were well for 3 or 4 months, then you could almost predict that they would get worse immediately after the next vaccine, whatever it was. And I had this experience many, many times. So So I started combing the literature, and I saw a lot of literature that was along the very same lines, but nobody was reading it. Um, like they found out that there were a number of studies that showed that what determined the risk was mainly the number of vaccines that the child received. So again, it was something about the vaccination process per se. Um, the other thing that really interested me was that um, there were a whole number of studies that showed that um, a child, that children who came down with and recovered from measles and mumps and chicken pox and influenza when they were kids were much less likely to come down with chronic diseases and cancer later in life. And this was a huge revelation, something that should make us all very happy. Um, and that furthermore, that the effect was directly proportional to the number of vaccines, the number of diseases that were recovered from in that way. So it was saying that the way to get a healthy immune system was to learn how to be sick, rather than to vaccinate against everything just because we knew how to do it. So so that just exploded my whole concept, and it made clear that the only thing that would show that would be to test the all-cause mortality and morbidity of vaccinated versus unvaccinated, and nobody's doing that. But that was anecdotal evidence that showed that. Otherwise, it would never have occurred to me in a million years. So,
Hmm. Yeah, and it raises the, as you said, I mean, the idea of a side effect. Well, it's kind of a misnomer. I mean, there's really no such thing. There's an effect. Uh, from every substance that a person consumes, there's an effect, which is to say, with respect to medicine, that anything that's taken will have an impact on the integrity of the organism and push it in one
exactly.
direction or another.
Yeah, that just in that quote that I read to you, the vital force is viewed as superfluous. It's a truism that doesn't help you. It isn't of any use. But for us, it's so important because it's what we use to trace the progress or the lack of progress in the illness. So it's yeah, it's as a physician, you have to speak both languages, and you have to, because the decision is always an individual one. It's not there. I mean, I haven't given a vaccine in 60 years, but I can imagine a situation where I might take one for myself. I I don't know that I would, but I mean I think if I were going to West Africa for to do missionary work for 5 years, I might consider getting a yellow fever vaccine, for example. Um, but I probably wouldn't. But it would enter my mind. Um, I mean, at this point, I'm sort of incorrigible, but
Good.
so.
Excellent. And so perhaps just before we open it up for questions from the audience, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about where you'd like to see homeopathy develop. What are your hopes for the future of homeopathy, not only in America but around the world?
I would like to see it as the first resort, the general practice starting off. Save the heavy artillery for when you really need it. Not you don't you, your objective is healing. It's not mastery. It's not causal control. It's not fighting the war. The symptoms, the signs and the symptoms are the attempt of the organism to heal itself, and we want to resonate with that. We don't want to fight that. So homeopathy gives a beautiful way to do that. It's not the only way. I think, herbal medicine is in the same ballpark in a way. Acupuncture seems to have that also, but one of the things I didn't like about acupuncture is you have to keep seeing the patient all the time. You know, 3 times a week if they're really sick and so forth. Um, but it's beautiful. I mean, I saw it work. This guy was a master. Um, but um, but that's where we should start. That should be the intro for all medicine. Um, so where 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 healing is your goal. It's not symptom control. It's not uh, better quality of life only. So Um, I mean, you look at the drug ads, and it tells you that so loud and clear. The U.S. is one of the only countries in the world besides New Zealand that allows drug ads to be on TV for everybody to see. So, um, yeah, that's one thing that Kennedy is trying to do that I like that he's trying to get those off TV. I think that's a good idea. But um, So yeah, I think it's a starting point. It's excellent for primary care, which is where I was coming from exactly. Um, I'm delighted to have specialists and to refer to them sometimes, but primary care is where it starts. So yeah, I think it would fit in. In India, it's commonly used for that. Of course, it's also used for the opposite. It's used for when allopathic medicine doesn't work, and they exist side by side pretty harmoniously. So yeah, that's what I hope. I would like to see it integrated, but that's going to take. Um, I mean, big pharma is not going to allow that to happen. They're going to have to be educated, shall we say, quote unquote. Um, whether they're educated by governmental legislation or in some other way, I don't know. But yeah.
Dr. Moskowitz, you may have just answered my question, but it was about what is the biggest threat to homeopathy that you see?
Oh, it's big pharma for sure. Um, no, it's all about big pharma because they have money, they have power, they control governments. They're, I mean, the right now, I would say the allopathic system is broken. It really is. I mean, I um, I see it all the time. Like people go to the doctor and they get parceled out into three or four specialists, and they don't always communicate, or you know, it's sloppy that way, and they don't keep track of what the others are knowing. So it's and of course it's based on this force, so which is excessive to begin with. So people are realizing that when they get really sick, a lot of times it's not going to help, or it may help for a little while, but then something else will happen. So um, they've it's been effective to the extent that, say, in the area of vaccines, which is the one that I know the best, probably, um, people revere them. They really believe that these have saved many, many lives, and in a certain limited sense, they have. They've prevented X number of people from dying of the measles, but they've also given them other chronic diseases that they don't get rid of. So whether that's a net benefit or not, I can't imagine that it is, because the weight of chronic disease right now is unsupportable. It's intolerable. Um, when I started practicing, chronic diseases, at least in children, for example, were very rare, and comparatively rare anyway. And now they're the rule. So it's a rare child that doesn't have at least one. So, I think more and more people are realizing that, but then there's this this other inveterate feeling that borders on religion, really, that has to change. And the drug companies are well aware of the situation, and they're spending a lot of money now to attack alternative medicine. Um, in Spain, for example, um, doctors are now not allowed to practice homeopathy. I mean, they do anyway, but they're warned not to. They're officially told by the government that they shouldn't practice it, and may be subject to penalties if they do. Um, and in Britain, it's no longer part of the National Health Service, which it used to be. So there's an offensive going on, and at the moment it's relatively successful, but I don't think it's going to last, because people are people, and they're realizing that the system is not working. So I'm actually fairly optimistic about the future of homeopathy, um, for that reason, because it works, and it works beautifully. People love it, and just as a GP, as a family doctor, I had the experience many times of delivering a little baby when they were first born, bringing them, watching them grow up, and then getting married and having kids of their own, and they're coming to see me also, because they want that homeopathy. It sticks. It's workable. There are problems with it for sure, because it takes a lot of skill, often with big diseases, more skill than I had. But um, but I feel that that's doable too. I just, I didn't get to that point. I never got to that level because, well, I had an interesting experience. I remember I went to India for a while to study with Sankaran in his school, and and there was a clinic that an associate of his had in downtown Mumbai, and I went there and I was sitting in the back of the room and must have seen 50 patients in a morning, and there were a bunch of students there. And as he was taking the case, the students would be sort of speaking out fairly loud um, the rubrics from Kent's repertory that the patient was illustrating. And I realized, there's nothing, we don't have anything even remotely like that. Um, it, and the other thoroughness is what I'm talking about. And um, Vithoulkas, when he first encountered homeopathy, the way he approached that was he memorized Boraki's uh, Boraki's book, the whole thing, and that's what I mean by thoroughness. Um, Roger Morrison, when he went to study with Vithoulkas, taught himself Greek so that he could learn from him. And now he's written this book on comparative materia medica of cured cases, which is going through the literature of the entire world, thoroughness. So I they get that, and that's happening. So that's that's what makes me optimistic. That that I understood that I didn't really learn a methodology from Vithoulkas. I learned thoroughness. It was inspiring. It told me that it's possible to do this. So, and at the same time, everybody practices it differently. The style is yours, and that's wonderful. So I think it is that's the trick, is for that individuality, for those individualities to now come together and make a whole. And I think that's happening. So yes, I feel quite optimistic about it. Um,
Yeah, isn't it so beautiful that there's so much dedication and so much thoroughness, as you say, because it's something that homeopathy is something that's rooted in truth.
yeah,
And and you can't destroy something that is fundamentally true. You can try to attack it, you can try and eradicate it, but those principles will always be held on to because they resonate with people who can clearly perceive them as true.
I took a seminar with Sankaran in California at one point. This was after I was over there in India. He came to Esalen in California, and it was probably the best seminar I've ever taken in my life. And he was developing it as each night he would take out his computer. The software is allows a, a generalizing from that information. And so he was developing his ideas about sensations and about miasms and systematizing them through the software. It was beautiful and exciting to be part of that. Just to see that that was possible, and then to apply it in practice to see how valuable that was. Um, it wasn't always valuable because the patient didn't always produce that information. And so I think he went overboard with it at a certain point because he started interrogating people to produce the kinds of data that he wanted. And it was a little bit too much because it was, it was just he was looking for something very specific rather than allowing the patient to guide him. So, but I think he came off of it a little bit, and I think he saw that. But it's exciting. It's there's a lot going on.
Excellent. Yeah, and so for our audience, if you have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A. We have one question that Patricia wrote. Patricia asks, what major changes would you like RFK to focus on the most?
Oh, I think I, I would the thing that I would like the most from him is to work on Congress to repeal the 1986 law that excuses the drug companies from liability for any deaths or serious injuries that vaccines cause. And that law was upheld by the Supreme Court. By the opinion was written by none other than Justice Scalia, who wrote that vaccines are inherently dangerous and therefore they will always need that protection. And that's and the other reason that I would like to see him do that is that he will get fired. And I think he needs to get fired because coming from the side of Trump, that means that the people who really need to hear what he has to say are automatically dismissing everything that he says as nonsense, even more than they would have before, which was plenty because of their reverence for vaccines. But now that it carries Trump's name on it, it's dead, it's toast. So yeah, I want to see him get fired. And I think he knows that. I think he understands. I think he realized that all he could do was to publicize things. But if he publicizes beyond a certain point, then the drug companies will make sure that he's fired. And and I think it's gotten to the point where he needs to be now. Because then I think the some people on the other side will see what is missing. What will see that they jump to conclusions a little too fast. So, and he's coming out with a lot of crazy stuff too. So, so yeah, I was a big fan of his before he ran for president, but then when he sold out to the Trump, I didn't like that. For that reason, because he increased the polarization that already exists. So,
Yeah,
Okay.
we don't need any more division, that's for sure.
yeah,
We're we're drowning in that right now, I think, in Canada too. So
yeah,
coming together is where we want to go.
yeah. I think this weekend there's going to be a huge outpouring in the United States, in the big cities, everywhere. Millions and millions of people are going to turn out, including me. So any other questions you have, I'd be happy to answer. Yeah, I got kind of wrapped up in personal history. I didn't mean to take up too much time with that. I guess I did.
No,
But
it was all very interesting and informative. So we have a question from Judith, and Judith asks, Doctor, you said that you might get vaccinated for yellow fever if you work in Africa for 5 years. Why? Aren't there any homeopathic solutions or local remedies for yellow fever?
oh, sure, I'm sure there are. Yeah, it's a shortcut. it's a really nasty sickness. Generally speaking, I much rather take my chances with acute disease than with chronic disease. Acute disease, either you come down with it and you get over it or you die. So, um, and at this stage of the game, I mean, if it's really bad and I'm going to die, well, okay, I guess I'll be ready. But but yeah, you're perfectly right that I'm sure there are homeopaths there who could help. Um, I haven't been that great about treating myself, I have to admit. I've certainly tried a number of times, but yeah, yellow fever is certainly treatable.
What about homeoprophylaxis? Is that something that you ever used in your practice?
No, I didn't, but I like the idea. I think it's perfectly reasonable. Um, and I like uh, what's his name in Australia? The guy who does,
Isaac Isaac
yeah,
Golden.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I liked his book very much, and I like him, and I think he's quite right. And there's been quite a lot of experience with it now, and it seems to work. But on the other hand, I think it's worthwhile to get some of those sicknesses and get over them because there are a lot of health benefits from that. So um, maybe, maybe to stick with the ones that are really severe and potentially fatal and do your homeoprophylaxis with those perhaps, but not too much because I think you need to leave room for getting sick.
Okay. If anybody has any last questions, now would be the time. Okay, we just got one more. Um, did your patient know homeopathy before meeting you, and did you educate them and explain how homeopathy works? Do you think it's important to talk to our clients about the political issues homeopathy has?
Well, there's several questions there. Um, well, first, as far as education, I mean, it varied a lot. Some people didn't know anything about it. In fact, I had patients who came to me by mistake because they just thought I was a regular doctor. And I, there was one lady that I had played volleyball with her husband, and he's, told her my name, and she had a urinary tract infection, and she just wanted some sulfa drugs. And, when I started wanting a whole history, she was very contemptuous and impatient. And I talked her into it. I was very patient, and it turned out I gave her the remedy, and it worked beautifully. But I had some trouble tracking her down to hear that information. So but I gave classes too. Like I would do first aid classes, and they were very popular. And I found that I could handle a lot of acute stuff over the phone. I had a call-in time every day, and people could call in with their questions or problems, and a lot of times they would call in with a case of the flu or whatever, and yeah, I could do quite well with those over the phone sometimes. And if not, then they would come in, and that was fine too. So. Um, But as far as what was the other part of that question? Um, I forgot.
Yeah, the other
There
part
was a there,
was about explaining
oh, the political.
political. Yeah.
Yeah, some people don't care about that. They just they just want to get down to business, and that's fine. But lots of people are interested in those things too. Um, Particularly because homeopathy has always been embattled in that sense, and has always had political difficulties in the United States, certainly just as much as anywhere, if not more. Um, so yeah, homeopathy is still widely ridiculed in a lot of places by a lot of people. Um, so so yeah, I think that they're more aware in that sense of political issues than a lot of a lot of patients are.
We have one further question about COVID. Have you treated any cases, long-term cases, and what was the outcome?
I haven't. I retired right at the in the early months of the COVID. I was already planning on it, and then the COVID hit, and it just happened. So no, I haven't. But I uh, Andre Sane has had a lot of experience treating COVID. In fact, he did a webinar with the American Institute of Homeopathy about that, and I think the AIH still has a database of cured cases of COVID. I don't know about long COVID. I'm not sure how much of a database there is about that. Um, but it's certainly, I mean, Andre went to a French nursing home and he sat there with patients who were really sick, and they did beautifully. So yeah, it's very treatable, and a lot of times I had it once and it was quite mild, but it was weird. I kept testing positive for about a month, and I didn't even I didn't even treat it. I didn't need to treat it. It was like the symptoms lasted, I don't know, a day, and they weren't that severe. I never had to go to bed or anything with it. But that was at the end. I mean, that was in 2024, I think. And I never did the vaccine or anything.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for being with us tonight. Thank you, Dr. Moskowitz, for your time and for the great conversation.
Oh, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure meeting you both. And yeah, I I enjoyed it.
Okay. So on behalf of the Canadian Coalition for Homeopathy, thank you for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you again next time. Thanks.
Good.
Bye.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you so
So
much, Dr.
long.
Moskowitz.
Good.